I think arts as well, it taps into that piece of ourselves that is really deep and like intergenerational and right from the very beginning of, people being people.
Yeah.
And um yeah, and how people made culture and how we made societies. It was all based on arts, right? From like sitting around a fire and talking and telling stories for learning and passing on those kind of historical stories to like dancing and creating those kind of rituals with our bodies and celebration. And then through like, cave paintings and like moving beyond that and creating, like clay vessels for like cooking and all of
Oh.
it. Like our all
Mhm.
of our civilizations are primarily like they're based on that we created arts, we engaged in arts to
Exactly.
create our
Yeah.
lives as we know. Hi,
Hi, good morning, Carol.
good morning to you.
It's lovely to meet you here on Zoom.
It is, yeah.
And
Such like
thank
an
you. Pardon?
Oh, just such a wonderful technology to meet people from the other side of the world.
Isn't it amazing? I always think that, think how small the world has become.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me. I am so interested in what you are doing, art therapy. I would love to know about your work and how it works. And it was such a coincidence. Just recently, I spoke to an artist in South Africa, and she was telling me about sessions she had with a friend of hers, um, painting, and the story behind it, and what amazing things came out of the session. And I just then realized, and I was already then booked to talk to you, and I thought, how wonderful! Now I'm more excited to know about your work.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So our art therapy is really interesting in that we use the arts within therapy sessions as opposed to talk therapy where mostly you're talking, right?
Mm.
Um, Within art therapy, we use a wide range of materials from fluid to rigid materials, and depending on the person, the materials will like elicit different responses in the person and allow them to explore different things. And whatever it is, it's really client led. So it's whatever the client is wanting to address within a session or within a workshop, that kind of thing. Um, we always have an offering of materials available, and then they can select what they feel comfortable with. Um,
And may I just ask you here, when people
yeah.
come to you, are they um, already do they have some sort of experience in some form of art that they are drawn to art therapy?
Some do, yes. And because of that experience in art, they are drawn to art therapy, yes.
Mm.
But I do get clients who have no art experience at all. And you don't have to have art experience to benefit from art therapy. It's
Mm.
about a different way of expression. And so a lot of times when like if someone has been through a traumatic episode, they cannot talk about it. And it's not just because they don't want to talk about it, it's because those memories are not accessible or they were encoded in different ways through imagery, through like sounds, through scent, through all of these things. And it's not like a coherent story. And so when they come, the art materials and the process of art therapy, it's always about the process. It's never about the final product. We're not creating masterpieces. Some
Mm.
people, sure, maybe they have more skill, but it's not about the skill. It's about the expression. It's about the process. It's about how do we move through these states and how do we tell a story. So there's a little bit of like a narrative to it as well. And then yeah, so you don't have to have, that's like a common misconception that you would need to be an artist to benefit from art therapy or to go to an art therapist or an expressive art therapist. Um, I primarily work through with art and art materials, but I do integrate. I have a background in improv theater, and there's um,
Okay.
a lot of different improv theater games that you can change to be on the page. And so I work through art. I translate them from like a theater world into an arts world. But there are expressive arts therapists as well who work with like the whole gamut of the range of expressive arts, drama, music, dance, yeah, art making, all of that. And they integrate all of the senses as well. Yeah.
And how amazing that it's all these different art forms. So people basically come and choose in which art form they want to express themselves then.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's surprising when someone comes, what they like, how their process is and what speaks to them in terms of what's going to express that story the best. And sometimes it's multiple different ways of expressing the story. So, like humming and singing and that kind of thing, or creating like dioramas, or creating like slideshows of pictures, that kind of thing. It really depends on the person and how they want to express that story and how that moves them. So some people will want to work with like photography as well. So we really have to be, as art therapists, we really have to dabble in a lot of different art forms. Like I'm not an expert in any forms. Like personally, I like charcoals. I like that play between the light and dark and all of the shadows in between. And there's a lot of metaphorical stuff that you can bring out of that. But that's kind of what I prefer to work with. But clients, we all are different, and so we come with different experiences, and yeah, it really depends on what they want to work with. And so we really have to dabble and know a little bit about it and be willing to explore different areas so that we can work with the clients and help to like move them along in their process.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke to a singer-songwriter just the other day, and he actually said that for him to write songs, really, he has to tap in sort of sad times or difficult times, and that brings out the best songwriting. So do you find also that people who come for therapy, that they actually then do something that is beyond their belief, that do they look at what they've achieved in this therapy session?
Yeah, sometimes I think it's more like that body of work. So if someone's come for a while, and depending on how many sessions, say it's like 6 to 8 sessions, they have a body of work. And when you see all of that lined up, it's quite powerful. They can see the story for themselves. And then there's some pieces they're all kind of connected, and they didn't like purposely make them connected, but there's like common threads throughout. And from that, they're like, oh, okay, like I see it now, and I can find those answers. Like I know the answer now, or I know how to move forward, or I didn't see it like that before. I didn't realize, like I already kind of knew, and then they can kind of move forward however it is that they want to move forward. I think, yeah, sometimes there's happy surprises, right? Like anytime we're doing art, there's always like those happy surprises. And I think like, it's kind of like that Bob Ross world where it's like, oh, happy little accidents and stuff. But with art therapy, what's interesting is like when they are creating art, what comes out of it and what they see. And so they might have started on one track in the process for the session. And then all of a sudden, like they're seeing like a situation from their childhood, maybe could be traumatic, could be not. And they're like, oh, this reminds me of my dog like the dog that I had when I was 5 and it ran away. And there's like a little bit of that grief that comes back up, and they can like, heal that portion of their inner child that's still, they didn't realize maybe they were still kind of grieving for that little dog, but it's like come up in the artwork, which is always so fascinating to be like, oh, like, wow, okay. And yeah, for the work that I do, it's really like following the clients along and being supportive on their journey. Yeah. And like celebrating the wins, and yeah.
But do you encourage then that they speak about the problem that they have, or do you just leave it? Do they ever speak about it, or is it just the process of creating that brings the healing?
Yeah, they speak about it for sure.
Mm.
Um, Really, like depending on the client, like sometimes they'll talk and sometimes they won't. And sometimes what they're doing on the page is not really matching what they're talking about. Like
Oh,
there's
okay.
like deep and powerful work happening on the page or on the canvas or in the clay and the plasticine, whatever they're working with. But then they're just talking about, you know, being at the grocery store or something really casual. And
Mm.
then if you draw their attention and just ask questions, like I ask a lot of questions, I don't interpret the work at all, but you can ask questions and get them to like probe a little bit deeper to find like a new understanding or to bring about, maybe they don't realize something. It's just like, oh, like I noticed like when you play with the clay or when you're working with a plasticine, like say they're making a cup or whatever it is, like the object, what they're making can be important, can not be, but like how they're moving it. So if it's like they're putting a lot of pressure into it and,
I
they're
see.
really kind of forming it, that kind of thing, you just can ask questions about that. And it can be like, oh, like I didn't realize that I was doing that, or I didn't realize that I was putting so much effort into it and getting frustrated about it, or whatever it is. Like body language that also speaks to us and like tapping into our bodies to make and tap like getting the clients to tap into their bodies to connect, like reconnect with their bodies as well as part of it. So if you don't notice that you're really like pushing on plasticine or like have,
Oh, yeah. Mm.
ripped through your paper when you're erasing and that kind of thing, like, okay, let's talk about that. Like, what is that? What is that pressure? What is that? Is it like aggression? Is it anger? Yeah.
And are they sometimes hesitant to start creating, or do they feel insecure about what they're making, or is that not? Because I'm just thinking now, if you have, say, some type of depression or something, that insecurity or that self-doubt, that even if you create something, that you'll always have a bit of a self-doubt that
Mhm.
uh, comes to the surface.
Yeah, I think that's part of maybe part of the human condition that we all get a little bit nervous about creating. And I think that's one of the steps in the process, like how willing someone is to put a mark on the page. So they don't have to create a masterpiece. They don't have to go in confidently. Anything that they put on the page is a start. So if they just make a mark across, they're like, okay, I'm just going to make marks. I'm just going to make lines. It's not going to be anything, but I'm going to make lines. And that kind of gets them over that first initial hurdle of like, I'm crap at this. I'm not an artist.
Oh,
Like we
yeah.
always we always think that we need to be an artist, right? Or like we're not an artist. Like I even struggle with that a little bit. Like I never call myself an artist. I always say that I'm a dabbler. I like to play with different materials and that kind of thing because artist is this thing that's like, ooh, an artist. Like if you're not
Oh,
in
yeah.
big
Yeah.
galleries, like you're not really an artist. But like I think the truth of the matter is that we're all artists in different ways and we are all creative. And so helping clients and helping folks tap into that innate creativity, we're all born with it, and helping them to realize that they are creative. From that, everything else flows. So if you are able to create things in your life, you're also able to create solutions for problems that you have, like presently. You're also able to go back and resolve things because you have a creative mentality and you can kind of rework situations to understand them better or even to just let them go and just to be like, okay, like this is done and this is not happening anymore. And this happened to me and it was not great, but now I can let that go and I'm moving on. Um, there's a book, I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a little bit older now. It's called The Body Keeps the Score with Bessel van der Kolk.
I've heard of it. I think my
You,
daughter read it. Yeah, but I've heard of the
okay.
book. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a lot of research on adverse childhood experiences. There's a lot of imagery in the book, and he only touches on art therapy a little bit at the back. Um, but throughout the entire book, there's mentions of art, creativity, there's imagery, throughout the whole thing that clients have done. And one image, it's like earlier on in the beginning, it's of like the Twin Towers in New York City. And it was from work being done with children who were in the vicinity when the towers fell. And in the image, it's like the towers and people falling from the tower. And then underneath, the child has put a trampoline. So to save the people.
Mm-hmm.
And Bessel kind of takes that as a cue to say that the child has the creativity to find a solution, even though like realistically not a realistic solution at all. But on the page and for the little drawings, that is a solution. And, you know, in their way, there's kind of a resolution to that, like, okay, I put the trampoline here. And from that, they can move forward with their progress and healing. And so when we have folks who come in and they have to first be willing to try. And so that's kind of the first thing. I mean, the first step with therapy is going, first of all. It's always intimidating, I think, to go and be like, oh, how much of myself am I going to share? And what are they going to say? And they're going to judge me and they're going to put me in a nut house or whatever it is. Don't do stuff like that. But like that's not me. I don't do that. But it is intimidating. And so then not only is it like for art, I think for art therapy and for art therapists, it's okay, first we're talking about therapy and getting you to come in. And then I'm going to throw art materials at you, not throw them at you, but there's going to be art materials, right? Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to invite you to use them. Like it's always an invitation. These are lovely little paint sticks. They're really wonderful to play with. But I'm going to invite you, and you can always say no. Like throughout art therapy, it's always an invitation. You can say no and we'll find something else. If there's a material that you don't like, even though, like I mentioned, I like working with charcoals. I do not like how charcoal feels on my fingers. It's too dry. It's chalky. I don't like it. Don't like it. And for me, like I had to kind of get over that, like that hesitancy of like, gross, like there's a texture thing happening with these things to be like, okay, I'm moving past that. And I'm moving into the art. And so folks maybe will have issues with materials. You know, they might not want to work with plasticine. They might not want to work with something that's very fluid, like watercolors or even alcohol inks, that kind of thing. Just because of like the texture, how it moves or whatever it is kind of grosses them out. It hits something within them that they're like, no, that's not for me. I'm not doing that. They might not want to work with glue, like liquid glue, because it reminds them of whatever it is, right? So always an invitation. So then, it's the therapy, it's coming for therapy, and then it's now we're working with art materials. And if you can get through those two things, then you're going to start moving along. It's like small movement, always small movement, right? Never like, we're not coming in and like, and now I've created an entire piece that is my body. It's on a massive canvas, you know, and I've done all of this. Like, that's amazing. But that's not what's going to happen. It's going to be smaller. So I have a couple pieces. These are my own pieces. So within art therapy, you can do like body mapping and that kind of thing. It helps to tap into like where things are in the body, where you're feeling things. Even if you're a pain patient, maybe you have cancer, whatever it is, it helps to locate where it hurts and then inform you. And then you can take that to your doctor as well. So you can use it in like a number of different ways, or it can touch on grief. So this one's a little bit, what I got here. Yeah, okay. So this is just like a very light, it's watercolor. And I had done this alongside. So sometimes our therapists will create art alongside clients. I had done a group, like a grief group. And this was a piece that I had done, and we were all doing kind of body mapping and where grief sits within your body. And so I kind of put like this piece, like heavy on the heart or like holding the heart. And then it's always kind of there. But each person's interpretation of their work is going to be different. And so being fluid and being flexible for their interpretation, that's very important. I can't just look at an image. Like if you were to do an image, I couldn't just be like, oh, like it's this, and this. Like I can ask, like, tell me about this portion here of the image. Like, what does that feel for you? And how does it feel when you look at it? Is it connected to anything else like in the image, that kind of thing? Yeah. I might have lost track. Anyway, so yeah, the pieces are going to be all like different and unique and that kind of thing. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. No, and uh, also it sort of then gives somebody the opportunity to really think about it, because
Yeah.
you know, for them to be able to create something, there's also a thought process behind it. So maybe without talking and thinking more, they also then come to the solution themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And you can move through different areas of your brain based on what you're doing. So a lot of times art therapists will do three things within a session. When they're making the art, and then they'll maybe do some poetry. They'll get the client to do some poetry or think of words that it reminds them of. And then they'll do a little more of a written reflection piece for themselves. And so it's through that like processing from like the bottom up of like, okay, maybe I've worked with clay. I'm getting really physical with it. I'm realizing maybe within myself, like, oh, this is really tough and I just want to give up. Like the clay is really hard, but then like as you're working with the clay, it becomes softer and easier. And then you're kind of realizing like, oh, it's becoming softer and easier. If I keep going, what can it turn into?
Yeah.
Right. And then you keep going, you keep going. And then when it comes time to like, okay, you've created, maybe like a little snail. That's, everyone knows how to do the little snail. They roll it up. It makes a little snail. And then after that, they're like, okay, I've made a little snail. I kind of like him. He's very cute. He's very delicate. And now let's talk about this. Like, how was that moving through that difficulty of the clay being too stiff to work with, of it then maybe adding too much water and it being too liquidy, or it moving along and getting warmer and feeling good on your hands and being able to shape and form it. Like in that like little world of like the hour that you're doing that, there's a lot of like processing that can happen, questions that can be asked, and then they do come to their own realizations about themselves. Like, oh, like I know that when things get tough, I might want to give up, but I do keep going. And that's a strength that I have. And they might not have realized that before. In like a small way, those strengths are played out in the art making and in the process of the art making, and then can be translated from the art making and from the page out into the real world. Like you have these skills of sticking to it, of, continuity, of working through kind of difficult problems. You have that skill, you have that capacity, but on a larger scale, like keep going. Don't give up. You'll get through it.
Wow.
Um,
This
yeah,
sounds
I think those kind of moments are magical.
this sounds so positive, like positive therapy, in the sense that you get a chance to not just talk about your problems, but to find the solutions, and to see the solutions and to see a better outcome. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing.
I mean, yeah, like that's kind of why when I was, so I went back to school through the pandemic, and I had a variety of jobs. I had worked internationally with a youth exchange program. I had worked with a large city in Alberta with their events and their attractions facilities and managed staff and that kind of thing. And then when the pandemic came, like everything changed. And I was like, okay, like what am I going to do? Like, I'm kind of at like the halfway point of my life, I think. Like, if you live till you're 84, which is a good long life, I think. I'm 42 now. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life that like fulfills me and that I can kind of be like the master of my own destiny and figure it out. I also live in a rural area, and I find in rural communities you really have to make your own magic. It doesn't always exist. You don't always have like an arts community that's like big and thriving. It's like small pockets of that. And there's not always the events that you want to go to. So if you want to go to those things, you have to create them yourself. And then people come, which is like awesome. And so during the pandemic, I was like, okay, I need to go back to school. What am I going to do? Well, you can like, I've always been like, being a therapist, being a psychologist, that kind of thing has always been interesting to me. I have a psych degree from, many years ago. And there was always like an element of art in all of the work that I was doing. When I was working with youth, we were always engaging in like like I was always integrating drama. I was always doing like art stuff with them. It was like a group for 17 to like 24-year-olds. So there was quite a spread of young people, and they were from Canada and then from other countries across the world. And there was always elements of that. And I was always seeking for like programming for them, like how can we find artists who can teach workshops for them? How can we like engage their
Um,
senses in different ways?
mm,
And then when I was doing event planning, it was the same thing. Like, how can we engage the arts in this event to make it pop, to make it really wonderful, and not just like, costuming or character actors or whatever coming, but like music and scents and like what does it smell like here? Like, do we have popcorn? Because popcorn is delicious and does such like a great thing for like that scent environment as well. But like, how can we add arts and how can we engage arts in like these events and these like offerings and programming offerings? So there's always like a thread through that. And then I was always interested in art therapy. And about 10 years ago, my brother passed away suddenly, and I had a young child. And like you're bereft, like you don't know what to do. Like the grief is so heavy. And I had never, like I had had grandparents pass away before, but like I had never experienced grief like that ever. And he was 5 years younger than me. So he was like my baby. Like I was
mm,
5 years old when he was born. And, when you're five, you're like
yeah.
the big sister. And so then when he died, it was like, I don't even know what to do. And so I always had kind of done some art stuff. And I found this like online tutorial, and it was like she had like 1 hour tutorial. She's called the Art Sherpa. She's from the United States. She does like very simple painting tutorials. And what I would do is like I would get my son down for a nap, and then I would have 1 hour and I would set up the computer. I would find a tutorial, and then I would just paint. And for that 1 hour, it was just me and painting and being calm, and nothing else really existed. And I felt like my whole nervous system just like calming and settling. And so then I just kept doing that like for like 3 years. I probably was like doing these like paint tutorials. And then eventually I got to the point where it's like, I don't think I need to follow a tutorial anymore. I think I can just paint. And I took like an art class at the university. But then very much within myself, I was like, there's something to this, because you can feel it. Like when you're doing arts and you are like engaging in arts, and like especially like for grief as well, like you can feel it. It's a visceral feeling of like how it calms your nervous system. And so from there, I was like, what about art therapy? Like, can I do
Yeah.
that? Yeah. And then I started like looking online for programs in Canada, and I was like, yeah, I think I can do this. I can do this. And yeah, I enrolled in a program, and it was a 2.5 year after degree program. So in Canada, there's like master's programs, and then you can go to private institutes for a master's level program. So because it was the pandemic and I had young kids, I went on an online program, which was like, there's always like this little bit of a stigma, like, oh, it's just like all online, but it was magic. Like
Mm.
even like my practicum during the pandemic, kind of everything kind of opened up for folks doing things online, which was amazing. But like my practicum, like I was working with clients from all over the world.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Mm,
like on like the screen like this, and
mm,
they would art, and we would create this room of space, this like, yeah, this like wonderful little space online, and this is where we like exist in the world and where healing happens and that kind of thing. It was amazing. Yeah, that was my
yeah. And
pandemic project.
but I think also, if you think of it, that person is in their environment where they are comfortable, you're in your
Yes.
environment. And then I think it definitely has a different, a different type of energy when you can be in your safe space and then also do this type of therapy.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, for folks where home is their safe space, it's
Mhm.
wonderful, and they're more relaxed. And for folks who
Exactly.
struggle to, leave the house or to get places on time, that kind of thing, it's wonderful to be at home and just boop, I'm here,
Yeah.
and we're here
Yeah.
and we're doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're calm in your nervous system when you go into therapy, it's going to be a lot more effective as well. Right. If
Mhm.
you're like really heightened or unable to relax and that kind of thing. I mean, that's the work of the therapy as well, to like calm nervous systems and bring people down and teach them tools to to do that and to go forward. Mm-hmm.
And I think also I've done over about 800 interviews with artists,
Wow.
different forms of art, and
Mm-hmm.
you hear stories, and it's always, it's art seems to always have this evolution in a person, that they talk about things that's changed in them or how they see things differently, how their art changed. And I think this is where the therapy then comes in as well, that it does change you, when you create and you see something you've created, then you do think differently about things and about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think arts as well, it taps into that piece of ourselves that is really deep and like intergenerational and right from the very beginning of, people being people. And yeah, and how people made culture and how we made societies. It was all based on arts, right? From like sitting around a fire and talking and telling stories for learning and passing on those kind of historical stories, to like dancing and creating those kind of rituals with our bodies and celebration. And then through like, cave paintings and like moving beyond that and creating, like clay vessels for like cooking and all of it. Like all of our civilizations are primarily like they're based on that we created arts, we engaged in arts to create our lives as we know. And so it's like the stuff that heals us and the stuff that heals communities is the arts. So there are community art therapists that work with communities to like reduce crime, create connection. If we're so separated, I think. And when we insert arts and engaging in arts, not just like looking at art, which is also has like benefits for us for sure, but engaging in arts with each other is very healing for like society in general. There is a wonderful book that I'm reading right now, and it kind of pulls everything together, and maybe you've heard of it. Your Brain on Art. Such a good book.
I'm going to
Such a good book. It basically, so it's Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us. It's by researchers in the United States, these two here. And they're basically like pulling together all of the like recent research on arts and how it affects us. And so it's not just like, art therapy. It's also like when you go and you see an opera, what does that do to your brain? When you go and you are dancing tango, how does that impact you? So it talks about like Parkinson's patients when they dance tango for like in the morning, they do this like tango dance lesson and their gait is all off before they start and they're shaky. And then when they finish, their gait has changed. They have a smooth gait. They're less shaky, like all of these things. And so it's like all of these arts, like the power that arts have for healing, like phenomenal. And we're only just starting to like learn how that is and why that is, which is like very interesting. So this book was like, for me, I was like, yeah, like we learn all this stuff in school, but then this is like a broader overview because my education was like really specific to creation of art and materials and that kind of thing and that kind of those kind of process. So it like looks kind of beyond that and really good.
Well, you mentioned before also that that community feel, and also that when you bring art into communities where there are crime or something, that it also helps. And this is something that I hear many times from conductors who work with youth orchestras or people who come from choirs. When they were younger, they sang in choirs. How that kept them off the streets. And that. Like one conductor said to me that for a youth choir, there are so many things besides the music. The feeling of working together, of being part of a group, of being aware of each other, and so on. So how wonderful that art can do all those things. And I think we realized that during lockdown, because I think people have reverted to art without them even realizing, because people started baking, and people started, redoing their homes. And isn't it amazing how we in that situation immediately started to create?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like returning to that space
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that thing that is like primal within us and that we need. I think a lot of times we just ignore that. Like in Canada, funding for music programs and arts programs is always kind of what's being reduced. When those are like the fundamental of like
exactly.
what makes us human is like our capacity to create and engage in the arts and use that to our benefit and to the community benefit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the pandemic was such an interesting, I mean, it was a terrible time, but it was also really interesting for
Exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it took us back to the basics. What do you do when it was for me sort of everybody just naturally started creating. I remember also here in the park near to where I live, children were knitting in the park, girls were knitting. And I thought that was so beautiful. And I thought, wait, you don't see that so often, but during lockdown, they did that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But part
Mm-hmm.
of why I'm doing this is because I have a wish that schools could um, see the value of art also, and that art can be subjects that stand alongside the sciences, the maths, the languages, and what is your opinion on the importance of art in the education system?
Oh, yeah, it's vital. It's vital. There's also ways of integrating the arts in those kind of primary subjects like math, science, English, social studies. You can engage in the arts and you can integrate threads of arts through that for teaching. If you're doing something on like, like younger kids, they learn about family trees, right? And so then they can like create a family tree, like they can actually do it, or they can use yarn to like what are your connections in
Yeah.
the community and create like yarn maps and stuff. So there's ways of integrating that. It takes more time, I think. I think like definitely in different countries like Canada for sure and in Alberta, like our education system is overburdened and we don't have enough funding for it. And it's always kind of a fight with our like government to like provide more funding, and we need more teachers and we need more resources and that kind of things. And if we had fulsome funding and like fulsome resources, like we could really create an education system that valued the arts, and we would see differences in our youth when they were graduating in terms of like what they believe is possible for themselves and how they conceptualize problems and issues and that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But
I
I don't,
also. Mm.
yep, no, continue.
Now, I also think that uh, it's not necessarily that we want to create, have everybody become an artist, but I do think that if you pursue an art form, you think differently when you are doing maths or when you are doing
Mm-hmm.
science. And I think all these subjects are really interlinked without us realizing, if you think of a dance, for example, there's a lot of physics involved in dance. And if you look
Mm-hmm.
at, say, art, there's a lot of chemistry involved. So, or painting and so on. So I think without us realizing, these things are all really linked.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Mm.
sure. Yeah. I think it probably takes an artist's perspective, someone at the top who's making decisions to take
Yes.
that like artist
Yeah.
perspective and be like, what if we did this? And
Yeah.
what if we threaded these
Mhm.
together? And what if we inserted all of these kind of art pieces? Like, how
Mm.
might that impact what's happening? And how might that change, yeah, how we look at things and how we study
Mhm.
and how we learn and what we think is possible. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a dancer in the UK, and she goes to schools and she actually takes the curriculum, say history, for example, and she uh, she gets, I think, an hour or something a week, so with the children. But she takes the curriculum and then she creates dances, for the children. And she said that the children love it, and they then remember the information so much better because
Yes.
they connecting it then with the dance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think that, kids will remember it a lot better if you integrate that kind of novelty and that fun and also that body-based learning where there's movement and all of that, as opposed to now I'm sitting in a desk and now the teacher is just telling me and I'm not going to remember because it's not interesting. It's not novel. It's not creative. It's not fun. Yeah.
But coming back to the therapy, do you think also the fact that you give people the opportunity to just take on a piece of clay or whatever, empty blank canvas or movement, that it also takes you back a little bit to your childhood, because this is how we used to, when you're in preschool, you can create without any sort of judgment, or because you're just a child. So does that tap into that childhood for the patients?
Yeah, I think so in some aspects. Yeah, definitely. Where a lot of times folks will come in and say like, oh, I haven't actually colored or drawn or done anything like that since I was in elementary school. And so I do think it kind of takes them back to a time maybe that is less stressful and that is more freeing. I mean, not everyone had a great childhood, right? And so maybe it was not the greatest time for them, but maybe that was through the arts and maybe when they were creating, maybe that was the only time that they were free and that they felt comfortable and relaxed and that kind of thing. But yeah, it definitely taps into previous versions of ourselves and fundamental pieces of ourselves that tend to get, pushed aside in favor of all of the other things that we, need to do in our lives. We kind of forget about those like elements, and then we get kind of focused on like TV and work and like family stresses and all of that kind of thing. Yeah.
So what are the types of things that people come to you for? I mean, what types of, or for what is this therapy, do you think, very helpful?
Yeah. It's really good for post-traumatic stress disorder, for sure. A lot of folks who were in the military
Oh, really?
have found a lot of benefit with for art therapy in managing symptoms. I usually, I mean, I'm sure there's like military folks that like live in my community, but we're a little bit further from like military bases and stuff. But I usually invite folks who are dealing with like stress. So it could be PTSD or just kind of other kind of stresses, anxiety, depression, grief for sure. And then anger issues. Really, you can use it for a lot of things. So every art therapist will, they have like different folks and different issues that they'll work with, depending on who they are and what they're comfortable with and that kind of thing. And so you'll get folks who are art therapists, but they're also sex therapists. And so they'll integrate that as well. And then you can use art therapy for couples therapy. I do that as well. Or you'll get folks who are really like, so you'll get art therapists who work with eating disorders, that kind of thing. I don't really work with eating disorders. It's not really my forte. But as people, as art therapists and as people as well, we know our strengths and our weaknesses as well, in terms of like what we're comfortable working with and what kind of issues we feel that we can help support. Because I'm in a rural area and there's myself in this community as an art therapist, and there's another art therapist who is not so far away. She's in another community about 20 minutes away. So she kind of floats between a bunch of different communities, but like, it's just kind of us. And then there's psychologists and other talk therapists. And so in a rural area, I feel like you have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades, because if someone is coming to you and they're like, okay, I have these issues, it's like, yes, for sure, we have to say either yes or no, like we can work with you, depending on, if we feel that we have the capacity and the training and that kind of thing to support someone with what they're going through. And if we don't, like referring them out. But there are ways that, like, if someone comes and say, like, I don't really work with folks who have eating disorders. But if someone were to come with me and say that, yeah, they're struggling with an eating disorder, but they also are working with a psychologist, maybe they see a psychologist once a month or something, then that's someone that I would say, like, okay, like I could probably work with you because you're also receiving
Oh yeah.
support from this person, and then we can work together to help to support you in a way that's beneficial for you. And so it's not just me being like, oh sure, like I'm an art
Oh yeah.
therapist and
Mm.
yeah, I'll work with you with this one. It's like, no, I really don't have any experience working with folks with eating disorders. But if you're also seeing somebody else who is supporting you and has that experience and that kind of breadth of knowledge that you need, then I can help you work through some things through the art as well, which is
Mm.
like such like a neat thing as well, because they complement each other. Like you can do both. Yeah.
Well, I
Mhm.
think it's a wonderful way of therapy. I just and everything you told me now, I think it's a wonderful way to work, and also positive. I find that it sounds very positive for me. You know, the way you work. But tell me, what are the wishes for you for the future? What would you like to do still?
Um, I'm really in the first couple years of my practice. And so like personal goals are like, to have a thriving practice. The
Mm.
other the other more like larger goals though is that I do want more folks to learn about art therapy and to see it as quite a viable option for therapy. I know like therapy in general has that hurdle of like, oh, mental health stigma and all of these
Oh yeah,
things.
yeah.
But like there's not just talk therapy out there. There's also art therapy, there's expressive arts therapies, there's dance and music therapy as well. Like there's the whole gamut of types of therapy that are available. So I would like more awareness of and more engagement in art therapy as like a profession and as an option for folks who need mental health care, um, from like government to private sector and like everything in between. Um, and then in general, like more art within communities and more
Yeah.
engagement in the arts within communities. I would love to see that as well. And
I
I know
mean,
like certain, yep, sorry.
no, no, no. So,
I like it's not like for my area, that is what I would like. And I know like I've been to communities where like the arts in general are like thriving and gorgeous and like the municipalities get it and the provincial governments get it, like they just are like on it and integrating it, and there's funding and there's like a vitality to it. And then there's other communities where it's not quite there yet. And so yeah, I would like more of that, just more arts in general, but also like that art therapy is a viable option for mental health care for sure.
I
Mhm.
love that wish. I'm wishing it with you.
Thank you.
But because you know the benefit, you know, you see that firsthand. Mm.
Mhm.
And do people also come to you, or do you think it's possible to come to you without a specific reason, but just to sort of um, create, you know, in that space that you're offering?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's also like one of the things. I've definitely had folks that have come and been like, I'm just feeling a little bit like I'm stuck. And I
Oh
don't,
yeah, yeah.
like I'm just in my routine. I'm stuck. I don't feel that like vital life force. I'm wondering if we can work together. Like, yes, of course. It doesn't have to be like I've had this like huge traumatic thing happen and now I
Yeah.
need to, I need to help myself so that I can live a normal life. It's more like I'm living kind of a normal life and that's the issue. That it's too normal. That it's too normal. It's lost its novelty. It's not so fun. So
Yeah.
like what can I do? And then it really becomes
Mhm.
like conversation and art making and really like setting the person on a path to thriving and to
Mhm.
creating. And once they're at a certain point where they're like, oh yeah, I can do this. And then
Mhm.
they kind of just fly and are like, all right, they're starting to get involved in like, art societies and,
Oh
create
yeah.
their own art and
Mhm.
really like see themselves as an artist or as a creator or that kind of thing, and kind of move forward with a little bit more magic in their life, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's just igniting that little flame, that,
Yeah. That little bit of like spirit that you're like, oh, there's
exactly.
possibility in it, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's what the arts does as well. It like engages that possibility within ourselves and within our communities to see what's possible and what we can do.
Yeah. Carole, but you're doing such great work. Really, I think I can just applaud what you're doing. And I think really that I think it's a great way for therapy. I can
Thank you.
absolutely see it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for reaching out and for this conversation. It's been lovely.
It's a great pleasure. No, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you're welcome.